Can you imagine waking up and discovering a window in your room that was never there before? A window that doesn't show the outside, but something much worse. The window that wasn't there.
Chapter 1. Albert. Albert found a cheap and well-located apartment in the city. The landlord, an elderly man with a monotonous voice, didn't ask many questions before handing him the keys. He only requested that he pay on time and not alter anything in the structure. He said it with a strange tone, as if his words concealed a deeper meaning. But Albert was too excited about the price to notice. The building was old, one of those 1950s constructions that are abundant in the city center. The walls had cracks hidden beneath layers of paint, the pipes made strange noises at night, and the elevator seemed on the verge of breaking down at any moment. The hallways were long and narrow, with poor lighting that cast unsettling shadows in the corners. Grateful to have found an affordable place, Albert settled in quickly. The first night, he barely slept. It wasn't just the building's atmosphere, although there was something disturbing about how the shadows stretched in the hallways and the muffled sounds that seemed to come from the walls. It was something else, a feeling of being watched that he couldn't shake, as if the empty spaces in the apartment were waiting for something. The change began on the second morning. The window appeared the way nightmares do, without warning, and with the unsettling familiarity of something that had always been there, just waiting to be noticed. Albert stared at it for several minutes, his mind refusing to accept what his eyes were seeing. It was small at first, with a worn wooden frame that seemed older than the building itself. The most disturbing thing wasn't its sudden appearance, but what it revealed. A dark hallway that didn't match the building's layout, an impossible space that shouldn't exist. That same afternoon, while working on his computer, Albert received a strange email. It was from an unknown sender, but the subject line made his breath catch. "Do you see it too?" The email was empty, except for an attached image showing an identical window to his own, in what appeared to be another apartment. The email's date was 3 years old. For days, Albert tried to ignore the window. He told himself that maybe it had always been there, and he simply hadn't noticed it, though deep down, he knew that was a lie. The window became a constant presence in his life, an open eye watching him day and night. Sometimes, when he walked past it, he felt a chill that didn't come from any draft, and at other times, he swore he could hear whispers saying his name from the other side. The nights turned into a progressive torment. Albert began to notice that the familiar sounds of his daily life were subtly changing. The dripping from the bathroom faucet no longer followed a regular rhythm. Now, it seemed to form patterns, almost words. The hum of the refrigerator transformed into barely audible murmurs in the early hours of the morning. And the worst part, when he looked at himself in the bathroom mirror, his reflection seemed to lag a fraction of a second behind his movements. The changes in the apartment became more obvious. His belongings appeared in different places each morning. Food vanished from the fridge. The mirrors reflected movements when he was alone. The space itself seemed to distort around the window, as if reality were bending. Desperate for answers, Albert started investigating. Online, he found a forum where other tenants shared similar experiences. They spoke of spaces that changed overnight, hallways leading to impossible places, voices calling from the walls. One user had posted about the window, but their message had been deleted, leaving behind only cryptic comments about a shadow that claimed those who saw it. On the forum, Albert noticed a disturbing pattern. Several users described similar experiences, but what chilled him the most was a recurring detail. They all mentioned having the same dream before the window appeared. A dream where they stood in a dark hallway, looking into a room through a window, watching someone sleep. They woke up without remembering if they were the ones watching or the ones being watched. One night, while scrolling through old photos on his phone, Albert saw something that left him paralyzed. In a selfie taken the day he moved in, there, in the mirror's reflection, barely visible in the corner of the image, was the window. But that was impossible. The photo was from before it appeared. Or was it? The distortions in his perception became more subtle and disturbing. The shadows in the corners of his vision seemed to move when he wasn't looking directly at them. The faces of people on the street began to look like poorly adjusted masks. When he talked to his mother on the phone, he noticed microseconds of delay in the conversation, as if the words had to travel through some impossible space before reaching his ear. He tried everything to get rid of it. He covered the window with sheets, which reappeared on the floor every morning. He used cardboard and duct tape, only to find the materials neatly folded on his desk the next day. Each failed attempt was followed by the window growing larger, as if mocking his efforts. On the final night, Albert decided to face it. He sat in front of the window, determined not to sleep, to discover what happened when the world was asleep. For hours, nothing changed. The dark hallway remained still, a vertical abyss that seemed to contain all the world's darkness. At 3 in the morning, everything changed. The light in the hallway flickered, and a silhouette emerged from the shadows. Albert wanted to scream, but his voice froze in his throat. The figure remained motionless, staring at him. When he tried to look away, his reflection in the glass didn't follow. Instead, it smiled at him. The air became dense, as if gravity had increased. Albert tried to move, but his body wouldn't respond. Behind him, his reflection in the window kept smiling, but it was no longer him. It was something else, something that was now moving through his room without making a sound. The window vibrated, a deep sound that resonated in his bones. The figure in the hallway approached the glass, its face a mask of shadows and emptiness. The window opened on its own, and the cold that entered wasn't the normal cold of the night. It was something older, something deeper. Albert disappeared that night, swallowed by the darkness that had been patiently waiting behind the glass. Chapter 2. Eleanor. 3 days later, Eleanor arrived at the building. She was a freelance photographer, and the apartment seemed perfect, spacious, well located, and surprisingly cheap. The landlord, an old man with tired eyes, barely looked at her as he handed over the keys. He only murmured something about keeping things as they were, the same words he had told Albert, though she didn't know that. The move-in was quick. Eleanor only brought the essentials, her photography equipment, some clothes, books, and her computer. As she arranged her things, she noticed the window. It was large, imposing, with heavy curtains that seemed to move, even though there was no breeze. Something about it caught her attention immediately, as if it emitted a frequency that only her trained photographer's eye could perceive. In the first few days, Eleanor focused on photographing the apartment for her urban space portfolio. When reviewing the photos, she noticed something strange. The window looked different in each image. They weren't obvious changes, but subtle alterations in its size and shape, as if it were alive, breathing. Eleanor realized that her photographs were affecting reality in subtle ways. Every time she captured an image of the window, something in her apartment slightly changed position. At first, they were small things. A book she was sure she had left on the table appeared on the shelf. A coffee cup moved a few inches to the right, but soon, the changes became more significant. One night, while editing photos on her computer, A movement in the reflection of the screen caught her attention. When she turned around, she saw the curtains swaying gently. Behind the glass, the hallway seemed to stretch infinitely, a tunnel of shadows that defied the building's logic. Fascinated, Eleanor began a photography project centered around the window. Every hour, she took a new photo, documenting its changes. At first, they were subtle variations in the texture of the frame, alterations in the depth of the hallway visible on the other side. But with each passing day, the changes became more dramatic. One morning, while reviewing the previous night's photos, she noticed something that took her breath away. In one of the images, clearly visible in the reflection of the window, was herself, sleeping in her bed, but the photo had been taken from inside her room, facing the window. Who had taken the picture? During her research, Eleanor discovered something disturbing in the original blueprints of the building. According to the documents, her apartment should have had a solid wall where the window was now. More unsettling, she found records stating that the building had been constructed over the ruins of an old orphanage that had burned down in 1940. Reports from the time spoke of children claiming to see windows where there shouldn't have been any, windows through which the shadows called to them. Her other photography projects began to be contaminated. In every session she carried out, regardless of the subject or location, the window appeared in at least one shot reflected in a puddle in the glass of a building, or as a shadow on the wall. Her client started complaining of strange sensations when looking at the photos, of unexplained dizziness and recurring nightmares. On her computer, she created a specific folder for the project. While organizing the images, she noticed something disturbing. In some photos, barely visible in the hallway shadows, there was a figure. It wasn't clear at first, just a darker stain among the shadows. But with each new image, it became more defined. One afternoon, while zooming in on one of the nighttime photos, she discovered something that left her breathless. In the reflection of the glass, there was the face of a young man with an expression of absolute terror. Next to the reflection, partially visible, was a suitcase she had found in the closet when she moved in. Eleanor's obsession with the window grew. She installed cameras that took photos automatically every hour. She began to notice patterns. The most significant changes occurred between 2 and 4 in the morning, and there was always more activity on moonless nights. Her photographs began to show technical anomalies. Some came out completely black, others had impossible distortions, as if reality itself was bending around the window. In some, the hallway seemed to contain additional rooms, impossible spaces that multiplied in the darkness. One night, while reviewing the latest photographs, Eleanor found something that changed everything. In a sequence of images taken around 3 in the morning, the camera had captured the exact moment when the reflection in the window came to life. It wasn't a simple reflection, but a gallery of faces, dozens of them, all frozen in expressions of horror, and among them, clearly visible, was Albert's face. Eleanor should have fled at that moment, but her professional curiosity was stronger. That night, she prepared to document whatever would happen. She set up several cameras at different angles and waited, her main camera in hand. At exactly 3 o'clock, the cameras began failing one by one. The electricity in the apartment fluctuated, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The window, now larger than ever, seemed to pulse with a light of its own, a sickly luminescence that made the shadows move in impossible ways. The viewfinder of her camera began displaying images that weren't there. Infinite hallways folding in on themselves, rooms existing at impossible angles, and faces, hundreds of faces emerging from the darkness. Eleanor tried to drop the camera, but her hands wouldn't respond. The shutter fired automatically, capturing image after image of horror. The window burst open, and reality fractured. Gravity shifted, as if the window frame was now the floor. Eleanor saw her own camera floating in front of her, still taking photos, capturing her last moment of consciousness before the darkness claimed her. Chapter 3. The cycle continues. The landlord found the apartment empty the next morning. On the desk was Eleanor's camera, its screen displaying the last photograph, a simple window with curtains swaying gently, and in the reflection of the glass, a new face added to the collection. The landlord kept more than just the belongings of the missing tenants. In a hidden journal in his office, he maintained a meticulous record of each resident, though they had changed during their stay, the patterns that repeated over and over. He knew he couldn't warn them. He had tried once, decades ago, and the window had claimed his own daughter as punishment. With mechanical movements, the result of years of repetition, the landlord picked up the camera and stored it in a special drawer where he kept the belongings of those who had vanished. Watches, keys, wallets, all the small remnants of lives interrupted by the window. Each object seemed to vibrate with an energy of its own, as if still connected to its owner, lost in that impossible space behind the glass. As he closed the drawer, his eyes lingered on an old yellowed photograph. In it, a little girl smiled next to a window. His daughter. The photo had been taken the day before he tried to warn a tenant about the true nature of the window. The next morning, his daughter's room was empty, and in its place, another window had appeared, identical to the first. Now there were two, and he knew that somewhere in the building, others were waiting for their moment to manifest. He carefully closed the curtains, just as he had done dozens of times before. He knew that soon another tenant would arrive, drawn in by the price and location. They always came, and the window would wait patient and unchanging, as it had for decades. However, the true story of the window is not in the apartment, nor in the photographs, nor even in the missing tenants. It lies in the small moments we all experience, in that fleeting doubt when we pass by a mirror and something seems out of place, in that feeling of being watched when we are alone, in that brief moment of confusion upon waking up when our room seems strangely different. Because the window that wasn't there yesterday is not just a window in an apartment. It is a reminder that reality is more fragile than we believe, that the spaces we inhabit may contain more than what we see, and that maybe, just maybe at this very moment, someone is watching us through a window we haven't noticed yet. They say that if you stare at any window long enough in the early hours of the morning, especially if you are alone, you will start to notice small changes in your reflection. They say that if you pay close attention, you might see a hallway that shouldn't be there, a shadow moving unnaturally, a face that isn't yours. But what no one says, what no one dares to mention, is that once you start noticing these things, the window notices you too. And then, it's only a matter of time before you find a new window in your room, a window that wasn't there yesterday. And when that happens, you will remember this story, but it will be too late. The window will already be waiting,